I remember back in my people-pleasing days, I used to have absolutely no ability to say no to anybody, whether it was my time, money, just any property. I just couldn't say no because I was very fearful that people wouldn't like me. Hi there, welcome back to the Mind Your Boundaries podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Miller, and I'm very grateful to be spending this time with you as we bust through the top 5 boundary myths. Before we get started, I want you to put in the comments where you're tuning in from. As I said in episode number 1, I am recording from my front porch of our 100-year-old house on Main Street. That's where you're hearing the road noise, and I want to know where you're tuning in from. So I'm in New Prague, Minnesota. One thing I want to say about this porch, I thought it was funny, is I felt like I thought of everything. Like, we would see Chad, the UPS driver, we would hear the traffic noise. Once in a while, I would be waving at walkers. One thing I didn't think of was how tricky the lighting would be as the sun moves, because it's all windows, right? So as the sun moves across the front of our house, in yesterday's episode, I just had to keep inching the desk further and further back to kind of hide. So now I have the front door basically shielding me from the sun right now. But so you can see, like, I'm further and further from the backdrop. It's just kind of, it's funny. And again, I know I could change locations, but I am liking the vibe here, and this is where it's going to be. So it's kind of funny. So New Prague, Minnesota, where are you from, or tuning in from? And remember, the more you put in, the more you get out. So do not be just a passive podcast listener here. If you really want to learn, make sure you listen for my cues when I say talk in the comments. Pop this in the comments, because the more that you're engaged, you will take so much more away from each and every episode. Okay, so the top 5 myths are: number 1, boundaries are selfish. Number 2, you don't need boundaries if your relationship is healthy. Number 3, boundaries are about controlling other people. Number 4, boundaries are mean and aggressive. Myth number 5, boundaries will make people leave you. So if you set a boundary, people will leave you. I think myth number 1 is going to resonate with a lot of you. So hands up if you feel like boundaries can either come off selfish or they are selfish. So just kind of drop the hand emoji in the comments. Boundaries are selfish. It's interesting because self-care has a bad rap of being selfish, and boundaries are the greatest act of self-care you could ever do. I remember back in my people-pleasing days, I used to have absolutely no ability to say no to anybody, whether it was my time, money, just any property. I just couldn't say no because I was very fearful that people wouldn't like me. Just any property, I just couldn't say no because I was very fearful that people wouldn't like me, and I didn't want to feel rejected. And what I didn't realize is, by me feeling like I was being selfless by giving away so much of every resource I possibly had, I was being very selfish to my family. Because when I was away volunteering, I was taking away from time with my kids. My husband would have to be on duty. When I would take our money and support causes, money that we couldn't afford to be giving away, that was selfish of me. So boundaries, definitely for me, a lack of boundaries was selfish versus having boundaries. This reminds me of Stacy. Stacy was a freak about mission trips. It was like her heart beat just to go on mission trips and serve people in impoverished areas. She grew up with parents that were both missionaries, and she was the only child, homeschooled. So that was her life. She got to travel all over the world and serve and serve and serve. And that was her dream, is to be able to one day continue on this tradition and work in other countries and serve other people that needed her. Well, it got to be so out of control that her husband brought her in so they could get some couples counseling. And I have permission to share this story with you because it's very interesting how boundaries, or a lack of boundaries, was more selfish than having a boundary. By the time they got to me, they had 5 kids, and he was the only one bringing in income. She was going on so many mission trips, not only through her church, but other churches in the community had asked her to come on to help fundraise their mission trips. And then she would be so invested in the fundraising part that she would go on their mission trips. So she was gone sometimes up to 2 weeks at a time, loving her life, loving her purpose. But her family of creation was struggling and suffering. And finally she was able to see, okay, maybe this is getting a little out of control. Maybe my passion for this is blinding and making me miss the fact that I'm taking so much away from my family. And she came up with this agreement boundary with her partner where she would go on 2 mission trips a year. However, she would still fundraise all of them through her church only, and everyone else she just delegated, like, no, you can find somebody else in your church. So that really helped them find some boundaries so that she wasn't being selfish and she was being a good partner to her family and a good parent to her 5 children. So even when you're giving and giving and giving and giving and it feels so right, even then, boundaries are necessary. Boundaries are the answer, guys. Boundaries are definitely the answer. So myth number 2 is you don't need boundaries if you're in a healthy relationship. This is like saying you don't need to communicate when you're in a relationship because they should be able to read your mind. No one can. And everybody, a healthy relationship is only healthy because it's supported by proper boundaries. A relationship is only healthy when it's supported by the appropriate boundaries. That is what makes it healthy. So don't forget that. Everybody has boundaries. And just think about it this way. How or when was the last time you set a boundary with a complete stranger? Someone that you know you weren't going to see again, you went out of your way to set a boundary with them. It's not going to happen. Like, why would you do that, right? Boundaries are always with people that we see all the time. Colleagues, family, in-laws, kids. Boundaries are everywhere around us. And in order to have strong, healthy relationships, boundaries are present to support that. So in order to have an appropriate relationship with your boss, boundaries. Close relationship with your sister, boundaries. Relationship with your teenager that you enjoy, boundaries. Having a relationship with yourself that's healthy, boundaries. Boundaries in what you say to yourself, boundaries in how you manage your time, so then how much stress, is induced by procrastination, boundaries around health habits, boundaries around scrolling versus strolling. Sometimes we can scroll a lot more than getting up and moving our body, and that just demotivates us, right? So boundaries around our personal habits. So not only our internal dialogue, but our personal habits. And having a great relationship with your in-laws, your parents, your neighbors, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Myth number 3, boundaries are about controlling other people. And I think a lot of us that are recovering people pleasers, or maybe you're still trying to get on the train of figuring out like what boundaries I need and trying to, heal from being a people pleaser and overcome that urge to be a people pleaser. We struggle with setting boundaries because we do feel like it is all about controlling or changing other people, and it's not. If you missed episode number 1, we covered the basics, boundary basics, and that was our foundation. And that was all about showing you what a boundary is. A boundary begins and ends with you. That means if you decide I need this change in my life to protect myself and make myself feel safe and balanced and strengthen my relationships, what behavior of mine has to change in order to make that happen? That's what a boundary is. It's not about you changing or controlling someone else. It's about what are you going to do to change your behavior in order to hold your boundary or respect your boundary. I have 2 stories with this myth to highlight why it's a myth. The first one is in recent pop culture. Jonah Hill unfortunately had some text messages tweeted out, or I don't even know how she released them, but his ex-girlfriend, Sarah Brady, if you live under a rock, she released some private messages that they shared together to, show people, like, don't be in a controlling relationship. This is a controlling relationship. And, yes, was she trying to embarrass him? Maybe. Was she trying to raise awareness? Maybe. Was she trying to also say, Jonah, you might want to revisit your definition of what a boundary is? Maybe. So let's look at this. I took a screenshot of the actual text or one of the messages because I wanted to read it to you. This sounds like a boundary. It sounds so sweet, and I do believe that he thought he was setting a boundary. I am a fan of Jonah Hill. I'm not here to bash him at all. I think he's hilarious. I love his movies. I saw his Stoots, I think. He had a documentary. He really loves his psychotherapist. So I'm not here to bash him. I'm here to clarify how boundary was misused here and how Sarah felt like he was trying to control her. So his text said, plain and simple, if you need surfing with men, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, to model, post pictures of yourself in bathing suits, to post sexual pictures, friendships with women who are in unstable places from your recent past beyond getting a lunch or a coffee or something respectful, I am not the right person for you. If these things bring you to a place of happiness, I support it and there will be no hard feelings, but these are my boundaries for a romantic partnership. See how it seems like, you might be thinking, it sounds like a boundary. He's just saying I can't be with someone like that. Right. But he wasn't saying these are all the things I'm going to change. So I can't handle you surfing with men. I can't handle you posting in a bathing suit. This is what I'm going to do because of it. He's saying you have to change all these things or we can't be together. That's why it wasn't a boundary. It was a list of things to change. A boundary would have been if he would have said, let's see. I wrote down 2 examples. If he would have said, so not this text, if he would have said, with bullet points, it has bullet points on all the things that she needs to work on. Sarah, I thought I could live in this world and support you as you deserve, but I'm not cut out for it. I won't ask you to change your life to be with me, and I'm incredibly sorry, but I can no longer be your boyfriend. He's changing his behavior. He's removing himself from the relationship because all of these things bother him, and it makes him insecure, and it brings him to a place that he's very uncomfortable with. That's a boundary. Another one would have been if he wanted to stay in the relationship, he could have said, because I get so uncomfortable seeing your social posts, I will have to unfollow you. So he's changing his behavior, not asking her to not post those photos. The thing that really got me on this is she's a professional surfer. That means she was a professional surfer, because usually if you're that, you were that for a very long time. And so he knew that going into it. So he had to have seen bathing suit photos because that's how she can make more money with brand deals. Just more sexualized photos, I'm sure, on her Instagram page because, as we know, we're in a culture where women get more views and more attention if they are sexualized. And maybe that's just her. Maybe that's her style. I don't know who this woman is. But what I'm saying is that he knew her profession. He knew her colleagues. He knew how she made extra money, like with bathing suit photos and promoting other brands. And so then to ask her all these things, or like, you need to change all these things to be with me, that's the controlling nature. And another, like, in case you're still kind of like, I don't know, another text I did find, a message said, Jonah said, respect however you want to live your life. We only get one. Sort of done explaining myself. She says, 3 removed, not the video yet. It's my best surfing video. Would you feel better if the cover frame was different? Any more specific ones bother you? Yes. One that isn't of your ass in a thong. Well, it's not a thong, but okay. So it definitely doesn't seem respectful, and that's where I was like, okay, like that sucks. So it just makes him insecure. So he was trying to say, I need this stuff to change, but he wasn't changing himself. That's why he got the word boundary confused. Here's a good example of, for me, how I can relate to Jonah feeling just kind of insecure. And if I was in a rougher spot, this would have ended a lot differently. About 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, no, we were here. So 8 years ago, my husband was training a lot of professional bikini competitors. And if you've ever seen a professional bikini competitor show, these women work their butts off to train and eat the proper nutrition, and then they get on stage and they just show their perfect physique in their prime. So they're like a bit leaner. They're not as lean as like a physique competitor, or what's the other? I don't know. So they're not as like really, really lean, like Scary Vain lean. They're still just sensual and sexy, but they work their butts off. Well, he was training them, and they would constantly reach out for nutrition questions. One night, my husband and I were sitting on the couch, probably watching Bachelorette. That's what we did. Used to watch that religiously. And he got a message from one of the competitors, and he showed me the picture, and he's like, does this look symmetrical to you? Or does she look symmetrical to you? And so part of competition is that you work your muscles like in symmetry. So when you pose, your biceps look the same, your butt looks the same, your thighs look, everything looks symmetrical. And you can kind of manipulate it a little bit the way you pose. And so if you pose long enough and in practice, you can just kind of maybe put like an illusion that it is symmetrical if you are lagging, like maybe you have a smaller left butt cheek or something. Well, the pose that she was standing in was the one where you are facing away from the judges. So you're looking to the back of the stage, and you just bend over just a little bit. So you're just leaning over. You got these nice platform high heels on. You're leaning over, your butt's perked up, and that's the pose. I don't even know what it's called. So he shows me this phone. Of course, I'm in my 7th grade track pants that have holes in them, his sweatshirt, and my hair's up in a messy bun, and I'm sure I just have like popcorn butter in my mouth. I don't know. I'm just like, oh my God. So just being a hot mess mom, looking at this gorgeous, stunning figure on the phone, and he's like, does this look symmetrical to you? I'm thinking, holy crap, if I was in a different spot right now, just with my own comfort with my body, because it's definitely been a journey my entire life, this would be a complete disaster. But luckily, that happened to be a time period where I felt comfortable, and I was able to give my feedback and, just maybe tighten up on the left side a little bit, and that was it. Let's say I did have an insecurity with it. So let's say I didn't like it, and I was going to be more like Jonah and set a boundary with him and misuse the word boundary. This is what it would have looked like if I was doing the Jonah style. I'm uncomfortable. I would tell him this. I'm uncomfortable with my husband looking at photos of hot women posing in bathing suits. If this makes you happy, so be it. I'll respect it. but it's a boundary for me, and I can't be with someone that does that. See how I'm not doing anything about my behavior? I'm telling him that, hey, if that does it for you, I'll respect you, I'll respect it. But in order for you to be with me, you have to change. Now is it more clear? I wanted to make sure I said it so that it didn't look like I was attacking Jonah, but hopefully you can see that I'm trying to tell you that a boundary begins and ends with you. So a boundary would have been, oh boy, I had no idea I would react this way to seeing gorgeous women that you're working with. I don't think my self-esteem can take it. So I'm not going to be able to look at the photos of your clients. And so I'm going to pretend that you work with middle-aged men, and how about you just don't show me those photos and we're going to be good. So I'm asking for an agreement style boundary, but what I'm doing is changing my behavior by just saying I can't look at those photos and still have a healthy self-esteem right now. But I know that this is your job. I knew this was your job like when we got together, and I respect that. So I'm changing my behavior for our relationship and for my own sanity. Do you see the difference? I hope so. Okay, myth number 4. Boundaries are mean and aggressive. Are front doors mean? What I'm saying is a front door, what does it represent? It represents where the public property stops and my property begins. It represents you need an invitation before you get to cross the threshold, right? Otherwise, you're going to get a very rude response from me if you just come into my home uninvited. Just think of our mental health if we left our front door open all night long and whoever or whatever could just waltz in all throughout the night. We would be a hot mess. Front doors are meant to make us feel safe and keep what we want out, like uninvited guests out until we want to invite them in. Our front doors are a protective factor from the outside world to our internal, like, safe haven, right? A lack of boundaries would be keeping with the door. You just leave your door. See how the light, see, it's already right here now. See if I can wrap this up since we're on myth number 4 without having to like move, keep shuffling down. Anyway, but just think how mean it would be if I left my door open all night long and then somebody took it as an invite to come in, and then they came in like a stranger just walked into my house, and then I just like went crazy at them because they're in my home. They didn't know that was a boundary, right? They thought they were welcome in, or I showed a weapon at them because like they're on my property. That is mean and aggressive, right? Not having the door shut, not having the boundary. Having a boundary is kind. Another example is from a TikTok question. She reached out, mom of 3 boys, all really active. Oh, my foot fell asleep. Don't you need? So mom of 3 boys, very, very active. She works, and her only alone time, she gets up early in the morning and she goes for a walk. She loves it because she can listen to her podcast, or she can just listen to nature if she wants. But that is her alone time, and she treasures it. It's very protected for her. Well, her neighbor, recently widowed, started to see that she walks at the same time every day, and she started meeting her at the mailbox asking to join. And when she reached out to me, she says, I need to set a boundary with this because I'm running out of excuses. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, not setting a boundary is really unkind. Like, that's mean, because every single day that you say, oh, today I'm running through something I have to do with a project, so I just need to think and be alone. Or today you can't come with because I'm going to be on a conference call or a phone call for work. All these excuses are showing her like, ooh, so you're saying there's a chance. That's mean. And so I told her, here's one way you could say it. Good morning, Cheryl. My walks are like my therapy, and I prefer to do them solo. However, I was going to ask you if you would be up for coffee on Saturday. Another way she could say it, like let's say she had some wiggle room. Let's say she did want to walk with her sometimes. She could say, during the week, I do like to walk alone and just kind of mentally prepare for my day, but I would love if you would join me on my walks on Saturdays. Isn't that beautiful? Definitely not mean. The boundary was clear and kind, but not having a boundary, dangling it, like just dragging the neighbor along, thinking that there was a chance every day that she could go with, that was mean. Last one, boundary number 5. And I think some of you, especially if you are a people pleaser, hopefully this isn't loud, my buttons are hitting the desk. Hopefully, if you are a people pleaser or kind of like swim in that pond, you'll resonate with the final talk. Myth number 5, people will leave me if I set a boundary. No. People might leave after you set a boundary, but it wasn't the boundary. If someone decides to end their relationship because you set a boundary, it's because the relationship was already fractured. It's because it was already not balanced. It was because it was more of a taking scenario where like you're the host and they're the parasite. And then when you say, I will no longer be the host, they have to go and find another host because that is what they're looking for in a relationship. So the relationship was already fractured. It wasn't the boundary that kicked him off. It was the fact that there was an imbalance already. And at the root of most relationships like this, and that fear of they'll leave me if I set a boundary, is the mistaken belief that I'm not worthy to set a boundary. Like they won't stay with me if I have any expectations or put any pressure or make them work in any way for me. Like I'm not good enough, I'm not special enough. And that is categorically untrue. And we will be talking about that a lot on this podcast. I'm very passionate about that. I remember the first time I learned the difference between value and worth, and it changed my life. So I didn't even plan on saying this, but it just came up, so I'm going to share it. Self-worth. You and I have the same amount of self-worth that we were born with. So we were born with the same amount as Mother Teresa, as Gandhi, as anyone you can think of that is just like the epitome of a human being. We all have the same amount of self-worth from the moment we were born to the last breath we take. Same amount. We never get more self-worth or less self-worth. It's just ours to accept. Yes, I am worthy of a life that I'm worthy of everything life has to offer me. Just fun and meaningful relationships and happiness. I'm worthy of it. I just have to accept that my worth is already here. I don't have to earn it. Value, on the other hand, is 100% variable. You can become more valuable to your family, your community. You can become more valuable to your family by going back to school, getting a raise at work, gaining new skills so that you do home repairs around the house. You don't have to wait for a contractor to come over. You can become more valuable to your community by opening a charity, volunteering. You can become more valuable in a lot of different ways. So value and self-worth are definitely different. You can raise and lower how much you are valuable to your family, to your community, but you cannot change your self-worth. You were born with all your self-worth, and you are worthy of all that life has to offer you. Don't forget that. In later episodes, we will talk about how do you handle it when people take your boundaries real bad. Like when they have a negative reaction, what do you do with that? And so even those that do choose to end the relationship, we'll talk deeper about that, like what that actually was, what that means, and how you can handle it and work through it and cope with it in later episodes. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right, we are almost done. If you had a light bulb moment for that last boundary myth, drop a comment. Let others know I struggle with that, or maybe you've already worked through it. Maybe share how you did so other people can connect with you and gain ideas and insight from your personal experience. Let's review, because this was a big one. Returning to episode 1, a boundary is a self-imposed rule or limit to keep you safe, balanced, and strengthen your relationships. It begins and ends with you. The top 5 boundary myths that we debunked and busted today are, number 1, boundaries are selfish. Absolutely not. Now we realize, when I was giving away everything, that was selfish, not having a boundary. Number 2, you don't need boundaries if you have a healthy relationship. False. Every healthy relationship is supported by boundaries. That's what makes them healthy. Number 3, boundaries are about controlling other people. No, they are not. Whenever you set a boundary, you're saying, this is my boundary and this is what I will change with my behavior if you can't respect it. It's all about what you will change about your behavior, not what you're trying to make the other person do and how you're trying to control or change their behavior. Number 4, boundaries are mean and aggressive. Talking about that front door again, and then your widowed neighbor. No, boundaries are clear and they are kind. They're not mean. The final myth is people will leave you if you set a boundary. And the myth here is if somebody has a negative reaction after you set a boundary, it is not the boundary that made them leave. It's the fact that the relationship was already fractured to begin with, meaning it was more of a host-parasite type of relationship, and a parasite always needs a host, and they just moved on to the next person. Let me know if you've ever believed any or all of these myths in the comments, just so I can see if your perspective has changed in this episode. And if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out on social media. It's getting harder for me to get to all the questions, but I am doing my best. I'll think of a different way to go about this, submitting questions and stuff. Maybe I'll set up a voicemail where you can submit your questions that way. That would be cool. And then I could play your actual voice with your permission, of course. That'd be something exciting. Okay, so next week we are going to do a Q&A style episode. So on social media, which a lot of you again will probably find me because of that, I answer a lot of your questions in 60 seconds. And I think it's awesome, but I really want to go deeper into my thinking and how I came to give you that advice, because I think if I can show you the framework that I use, that will help you be able to set boundaries left and right, just like I do. And you've already told me so much that you love the way I communicate, the way I say, my wording, my scripts, boundaries. And if you can learn how I do it, just the building blocks, it will help you be able to do it all day long, all on your own. So that's what we're going to do next week, is we're going to be answering Q&As and just diving deeper into some of the Q&As that I've already answered on social media, so you understand how and why I came up with the advice I gave. I hope that you are gaining a lot from this. Let me know, obviously, in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed. You got the bell all checked so you don't miss an episode. Okay, friends, I'm really happy that you spent your time here with me today and that you were active and not a passive podcast listener. And until next time, make sure you mind your boundaries.